Farrik!
Hello, and welcome to Dank Farrik, a Star Wars podcast. We are your host, Carlos,
Tyler Mendelson.
and we're here to talk about Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace.
Yes.
AKA. Okay, I'm going to stop with the
The
AKA.
beginning.
Yeah, the beginning. Well, it was actually called The
It was
Beginning.
originally called The Beginning.
Yeah, like the production title.
And Liam Neeson was actually given a lightsaber from the one that he used in the film as Qui-Gon Jinn, and a little plaque on side of the on his lightsaber.
Yeah, so the
There's like a
beginning.
little wooden plaque. It says Star Wars Episode 1, The Beginning, which is pretty
Yeah.
cool.
So this is the first of the prequels, of course. This is like for me
Mhm.
personally, this is the first one I've seen, like when I was like 4 years old or
But a
so.
lot of people, their first introduction to Star
Yeah.
Wars was.
We're definitely, I think, the generation of the prequels.
Yeah.
And it came out 16 years after the previous one, Return of the Jedi.
Which is really crazy to think because like how much changed in filmmaking with like the technological advances since Return of the Jedi.
So since Return of the Jedi, which came out in 1983, there were a couple of breakthrough movies with in terms of visual effects, which Star Wars, of course, leans heavily on. One of them was Terminator 2, which I'm sure many of you have seen, in which like one of the Terminators like liquefies and morphs into, and it's like 1991, so it's like pretty advanced for its time. And then,
Yeah.
of course, the big one is Steven Spielberg did Jurassic Park, and dude, those dinosaurs still hold up.
It is really crazy to just like go back and watch the original Jurassic Park and see the way that the dinosaurs look so realistic. You know, like I
Yeah,
remember seeing that as a kid and just I was always one of the people like I grew up loving dinosaurs as a little kid. Wanted to be a paleontologist, like in preschool. People were like, "What the hell is that?" And I was like, "Yeah, I want to be a
like
paleontologist."
what the hell is that? Like, have you
Dinosaurs,
seen Jurassic Park?
absolutely obsessed. But the way the dinosaurs, especially the T Rex, just because it was a lot of it was animatronic,
Mhm.
just still holds up today. Is just incredible.
Yeah, and so then George figured, hey, my company ILM, who's doing all these visual effects, they probably can step up to the plate of making the prequels for Star Wars, because his imagination was running so wild on how he was going to execute it. But he was
Mhm.
like, I think the time is right. And if you see like the documentaries for Phantom Menace that you can find in, like, I think it's on YouTube already,
Yeah.
but originally I remember watching it on the DVD. Um, he started writing in 1994. Now the movie came out in 1999. So he started
Mhm.
sketching out not only Phantom Menace, but I think like the broad ideas for the whole trilogy, because of course he already knew where it was ending, like
Right.
what was the end point. And Phantom Menace, the excitement, also it's covered in that documentary. The excitement for that release, it was like insane.
That's the best part.
Yeah, because there's this whole generation of the late 70s, 80s who grew up with Star Wars, and they were all grown up now, and Star Wars was coming back, and it was promising to be the like an epic backstory for Darth Vader, and everyone was
Yeah.
so so jacked up. And well, however it got received, we'll probably cover a little bit more of that later. But but as a kid, I was three or four, and I still remember there's that scene where when Darth Maul is with the binoculars
Yeah.
in the
Yep.
desert, and I remember thinking like, dude, the devil's here, and he's hunting.
For me, it was all of those Pizza Hut commercialized what is the word I'm looking for?
The
All
cups,
their promotions that they
the
did for
merch.
the film, the merchandise.
Yeah,
Um, like as a kid, I remember that kind of stuff is what led up to the film and the hype for it for me. And at that point, I had seen the original trilogy and loved it.
hmm
I was already obsessed, so I was just like kind of ingrained in it. But all these different like specialized cups and stuff that was coming out when you make a certain kind of order for Pizza Hut, and there was just tons of commercials and stuff like that. So I was just extremely hyped to go see it. Um, and you got to think like all these people from the 70s and 80s who grew up with the original Star Wars thought it was just going to be like the greatest film ever made at this
Literally.
point because they're like, oh my god, like it's back and we get to see it with all these new effects and
Even before
they had
that,
no idea.
yeah, they had no idea. Before that, I remember the teaser trailer, reading or seeing in the documentary, was going to be released in like before. This is when like it wasn't an online thing where you just go on YouTube, or maybe you download it somewhere and you have to wait 3 hours to download.
Yeah,
Like,
you had nothing.
so you had to go to the movie theater to watch previews before a
Hmm.
different movie. I remember there was like the Brad Pitt movie, Meet Joe Black. Apparently, like a bunch of Star Wars fans went to go see that, watched the trailer, and then left the movie theater because they only cared about watching the trailer. So
Yep,
I mean, so yeah, so the hype
it's a
was
different time.
above the roof, and the movie comes out. You know, we all watched it as kids. We enjoyed it. Did we understand it? I don't know. We watched it as adults now, and there's of course a bunch of stuff that I think it's worth analyzing in the grand scheme of all Star Wars, especially considering
Absolutely.
that this is the beginning. You know, this is supposed to set up what Star Wars is about in general. So of course we start, and it's there's no war yet. You know,
Yeah,
it's a peacetime,
peacetime.
and as the crawl states, uh, the taxation of trade routes is in dispute now.
We don't even have to say it. It's just, we both know where this is going and how funny it is.
What does that mean exactly? It's a good question. Um, but the crawl is in and of itself extremely, like, the language is very, oh
Different.
yeah, very convoluted. I think you need to pay close attention to what it's saying, and even then, maybe if you don't know like the inspiration in which George is drawing from, maybe it goes over your head even then.
Well, you
Uh,
have to think, you know, I I believe George's backstory with the whole governmental side of things fits perfectly, but it's so jarring coming from the very basic, easy to understand story of the original trilogy.
mhm,
And then suddenly we're thrown into this with this whole, taxation of trade routes, and there's a galactic senate and like all this
mhm.
kind of crazy governmental stuff.
Trade
And you're just like,
Federation.
yeah. So you're just like, whoa, like, what is this? How does this fit into Star Wars?
I think the prequels are meant to be opposite on the originals in many ways. Like, the body of government is quite literally the opposite of what it is in at the beginning of the original trilogy. You know,
Hmm.
and now it's a time of democracy and peace, and at the original
Democracy,
trilogy, it's a tyrannical empire
dictatorship.
in the middle of a civil war.
Yeah.
So I think it's fair to say that it's meant to be different and feel different, because it is different, because we haven't gotten to that yet. This is what this story is about: is how we get from the complacency and peace period of time, and then we go to like the tyrannical empire where we get the fun adventure stuff.
Right. But even as it makes complete sense, just for like a kid's perspective,
Hmm.
it's a lot harder to follow the enriched backstory.
For
Like
sure.
these films are meant to enrich and enliven the
The universe.
galaxy itself as a
Yeah.
whole and explain how things are and how they came to be.
Yeah.
But as a kid, it's just hard to follow this kind of stuff if you don't really understand what government is and like how this kind of stuff works, you know.
Right. And I think even as an adult, it's fairly like, why am I watching this? But so let's break it down, because we watch Star Wars a lot. We talk about it, but let's break this stuff down and really try to understand what's the plan of the Trade Federation. What
Mhm.
does the taxation of trade? So what I understand from it is the Republic, which is the Galactic Senate, that is sanctioning higher taxes for trade routes, and the
Yeah.
Trade Federation is a corporation that deals in a lot of, like, it has associations to a lot of planets in which it travels goods inside and out the planets, you know, import and
Yep.
export.
Exactly.
So the Trade Federation is, quote unquote, hoping to resolve this conflict by blockading one of the planets for Naboo to force the Senate's hand to get lower taxes. But what we really learn is that the blockade is just the front. Like what they're really doing is following the instruction of the Phantom Menace, quote unquote, Lord Sidious, who's telling them like you're gonna invade the planet. It's not just a blockade, you know. And
Yeah.
the whole point of invading the planet is, of course, for him to consolidate power in the Senate. But it's very like layered and a lot more complex than it was in the original trilogy.
There's not really like a clean cut display of what is the plan and why is this happening. You know, you kind of have to piece that together yourself, so it's a
Hmm.
little bit more confusing.
Yeah,
I still think like it's up for debate what exactly was like we know Palpatine's plan is to gain power and
right.
to gain emergency powers and become the Supreme Chancellor and then eventually become Emperor. But at this point in time, what is his goal with this blockade slash invasion? And does he actually want the treaty to be signed
Hmm.
by
Queen Amidala.
Queen Amidala?
Yeah.
Does he actually want that to happen?
So first of all, let's talk about the very beginning of the movie. We get the Jedi Knights are ambassadors of the Supreme Chancellor,
Hmm.
who are secretly dispatched. So the Supreme Chancellor is basically like the president of the Republic, and
Yep.
they get dispatched to settle the conflict of this blockade.
They're peacekeepers.
They're peacekeepers, but really what they are is they're kind of like the mafia,
They're
you know?
enforcers.
Yeah,
They go there to intimidate.
right. Aggressive negotiations.
Yeah.
uh, they get sent to to make like frontier justice a little bit, kind of,
Yeah.
where they go there like as rogue agents and settle the
Hmm.
conflict because that's what they do. The function they have now is very political in that sense. Um, so they get sent there. We get a Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Now we hear Obi-Wan and we're like, okay, good shit. Obi-Wan is here. We only seen him as an old man in the earlier movies. We finally see Jedi's on their prime and they're kicking ass, like way bigger than they were in like in the original trilogy. We didn't see anything like that.
Yeah.
Like the closest we saw was probably Luke like cleaning out Jabba's sail barge
Well, we
type thing.
had one Jedi at the time, essentially.
Right.
You know, there was just no one else. So to see multiple Jedi doing
At the
their
height
thing
of
at the
their
height of the
power.
Republic, you know,
Yeah.
it's very different.
Yeah. And the Trade Federation aliens were extremely scared. They were like, we will not survive this. And if you look at it, it's quite the opposite from the original trilogy in the sense that we're now rooting for the strong and powerful, whilst in the original trilogy it was like the underdog, the guys who were like they didn't have the status at all. They were fighting the big man, and in
Right.
this sense, now we're rooting for the overlords who have the power. And I love that little moment. And I think it's in George Lucas's commentary track where he speaks about how when Qui-Gon is trying to break the door with his lightsaber, like cut a hole in the door, he spoke about how he was playing with the trope of the monster movie, where the classic monster movie where the monster is like clawing his way into the room and they're like, oh fuck, the monster is coming, and it's like
Hmm.
that dread and suspense that the monster is ever closer, and that he was like inverting it because now the good guys were the monsters. And I think it sets the tone for the whole trilogy because that is really what the story is about the good guys becoming the bad guys.
As far as Phantom Menace goes, though, I think it's a great way of them showing how much Palpatine's influence is on everybody,
Hmm.
including the Trade Federation, and like they really weren't evil people. Essentially, they're just business people trying to listen to this mysterious figure who is promising them things that they want. You know,
Well, they were
aka
greedy.
the devil. Yeah, they were greedy, but
That's There you go.
you know
That's a
they were
path to the dark side.
manipulated. They were
Yeah.
manipulated by this evil guy who promised them things that they wanted,
Yeah.
and he is the one who thrust all these things into motion and just created this turmoil within the republic. And I think that shows like the mastery of Palpatine, in which he is the Phantom Menace, because he he is ever revolving around whatever the situation dictates. He can
Hmm.
change his plan up and make it work in his favor. He
Yeah.
doesn't have a set plan from the beginning. I think he evolves it to work
Yeah.
towards whatever the situation
I think
dictates.
he essentially has an end goal, which is to become
Yeah,
chancellor
he
first,
has he
and
has the end
then
goal.
he's trying to see how he snakes his way into
Yeah,
doing that.
but he
Uh,
changes the plan as it goes.
yeah, for sure, because the circumstances change. Um, so we get that moment with the Jedi. They escape. They realize there's an invasion. You realize that the Trade Federation is more than meets the eye, because Qui-Gon says this is an outplay for the Trade Federation. Like,
Hmm.
these guys are like the corporation. Like, why would
Yeah.
they? It's like a private army.
Hmm.
And they descend to Naboo. In Naboo, there's the Queen. We see our introductions to the Queen, who's talking to Senator Palpatine, actually. So we see the Phantom Menace, even though maybe the audience doesn't realize it, unless you know it already, is that we see him talking to the bad guys, quote unquote, and then the good guys down, and he's like playing both sides
He's playing both sides. Yeah.
always. And we learn about Amidala. I think this is a great scene that introduces the character, because the final line she says in that scene is, "I will not condone a course of action that will lead us to war."
Hmm.
That really tells you everything you need to know about the character as a person,
Yeah.
and sets her up. And I kind of resent when people say that there's like the characters in the prequels are less developed, because I think they have those little mission statements that kind of sum them up.
I think some of the lines within the prequel trilogy at large were like cringy in how they were written because
Mhm.
George struggles with emotion as far as dialogue goes, but the characters have a lot of characterization. Their whole backstories and their mindsets and their motives and all that very well developed.
Mhm. And I think like his emotions, and he's talked about how the dialogue is secondary. These are kind of seen as
Hmm.
silent movies. Like, the music and the visuals drive the emotion,
Yep.
and so the dialogue is really there as like a decorum, basically.
Yeah.
But so we get down there, and we meet, of course, the great Jar Jar Binks. Now, what do you mean? Oh God, you don't like Jar Jar?
I
So
it's conflicting for me. So
okay.
I think at the heart of it,
Hmm.
Jar Jar is
He's
everything
the
he was
key.
supposed to be. Well, no, I'm not even talking about like his role within like what happens,
Yeah,
but as a character himself, I think he's good for kids. He's good
yeah,
for what he was meant to do. And
and it's
I
made
would
for
just
kids.
I would just especially say that Ahmad Best, who played him,
Hmm.
did such an amazing job, and that guy deserved no hate whatsoever for everything that happened. He got to a point where he was bullied and tormented for this role to where he literally wanted to commit suicide, and that is devastating. Like, I personally, that hurts to know that he was hurt that badly by it because he was so excited to do this role,
Yeah,
and it was just absolutely shit on for it. But he did such a good job, and no matter what people think of him, I hope they would understand that, like, as an actor, he did exactly what he was supposed to do.
yeah, and I think in the Ahmed sense of things, many of the inspirations that he and George were drawing from is like early slapstick silent film, like
Hmm.
Buster Keaton. Jar Jar, as in many things in the prequels, they're like throwbacks to early film genres that are not like around anymore as much, or they've been changing through the times. But Jar Jar was meant to be like a physical comedian, and
Yes,
very much like Buster Keaton or Charlie Chaplin or any of
the
those.
the silent film stars.
The
He was an homage to that generation.
and I think that's worthy, because if the original Star Wars was like sort of riffing off on Vietnam and the struggles at the time, if you're gonna go further back in time, it only makes sense that like the inspirations are actually even, like, you know what I mean,
Even
like
further back, yeah.
further back.
Hmm.
Um, and I think I appreciate Jar Jar for that. And dude, it's the first, and I think people don't give this credit enough because they always talk about Gollum, but it's the first CGI character, like complete CGI character, that's like an interacting character that talks with the
If you,
characters.
yeah, and if you go back and watch it, especially for how experimental it was,
Hmm.
it still holds up. Like, I'm not saying it looks like fucking, Avatar or something like further in the future, but it holds up and it does its job.
So yeah, Jar Jar is a big point of contention for fans. I also had my Jar Jar hate period of time when I was
Mm-hmm.
like, people were right. Jar Jar sucks. George is crazy. The prequels suck. But I really come around, and I think a lot of people have.
Yeah.
So we get down into Gunga City, which is where he comes from. It's a hidden city, and what? I see you like not
I'm
liking
just thinking of Boss Nass.
that. I like Boss Nass. Um, but we get this little sequence where we meet this culture of Gungans, like amphibian-like creatures under the water in
Under the
Naboo.
sea.
And I think Obi-Wan says a very important line, which I think is a big theme of the movie, which is when Boss Nass is telling him like, we're not helping the Naboo think they're better than us. Obi-Wan says, you and the Naboo form a
Form
symbiote
a
circle.
symbiote. Yeah.
What happens to one of you will affect the other. You must understand this.
Yeah.
And I like that because it's really one of the big themes of the movie and of all of Star Wars. Really, there's this thing about the master apprentice relationship, which is also I think like very symbiotic, um, especially like in terms of the Sith. Like one of them is the power, and the other one is like wields it, and they're
Yeah.
always striving to get more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but in this sense it's about communion and being able to live in a community of people even though they don't all look like you or they don't all agree with you in everything. It's a cool little moment that kind of sets up one of the big themes, and we get Qui-Gon Jinn sparing Jar Jar's life and bringing him on into the fold. And I think we talked a little bit about this during the Return of the Jedi episode, but Luke and Qui Gon here do the same thing. What Luke did with the Ewoks, Qui Gon did with Jar Jar, which is realizing that they're like important in the grand scheme of things, even though
Mm-hmm.
they seem insignificant to everyone else. Which they eventually end up like being a big part of what they need to do at the end of the story. So we get the little underwater sequence, which is it's fun. Don't laugh.
Gooberfish.
Yeah, I love the little moment when Qui Gon like relax and puts his hand on Jar Jar's shoulder, and he just gets all like super high, and he's like, "Oh, ugh."
There's always a bigger fish.
There's always a bigger fish." The
Listen.
reason why I bring that up is because that's also a big sort of it's a joke in the scene, but it's also kind of part of the story of the Phantom Menace. It's that idea
It
that
is, yeah.
like the villains are not the villains. There's always a bigger fish, Like Darth Maul isn't the main villain. The Trade Federation, the Neimoidians aren't the real villains.
Mm-hmm.
Watto isn't the real villain. The real villain is the Phantom Menace, and that's Palpatine. And it brings in that little thing of there's always a bigger fish.
Yep.
Um,
It's a good little sneaky line that has
yeah,
greater meaning.
exactly. And it's also brings back the whole symbiote circle thing because the big fish, it's the little fish, so it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like the chain of
Everything affects something else.
exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
but that line is also probably the introduction of quotes that have become memes. So one of the great things that the prequels does, and we'll obviously go into greater length of this with episodes 2 and 3.
Mhm.
Ep- the prequel trilogy is a meme goldmine. It I think the prequels have gained more popularity from memes than anything else.
Mhm.
And just the lines that George Lucas created that are in the prequel trilogy are so easily turned into memes that it sort of enhanced the dialogue and enhanced the trilogy as a whole. And there's always a bigger fish is one of them that sort of like is an early one into episode 1
Mhm.
to where it starts with that and then goes into more of the dialogue that becomes memes just later on down the road, obviously, like probably well over a decade after the films came out when memes started to become popular. But like nowadays,
Mhm.
see tons of memes just completely unrelated that have, prequel lines in them.
Now, the thing about the memes, though, like I wonder, I don't know where you fall on this. Are they making fun of the dialogue, or are they celebrating it as something that is funny either way, or is it
So
post
I
ironic?
I used to feel like it was making fun of the films,
Hmm.
but I would say most of the lines come from out of the trilogy. Most of them
Yeah,
come from episode 3.
yeah,
I think most of the lines in episode 3 have become memes. Like literally all the lines, just
hmm,
even like things that don't even seem like consequential at all have become memes in some
yeah,
way. And it sort of like enhances the love for the film in a weird way. Like
hmm.
it
Validates it
creates
a
a
little bit
yeah,
more.
it creates a greater appreciation for itself.
Hmm.
Like like the memes have made the prequel trilogy more enjoyable for me. And I
Right.
already like them to go into that. Like I was never a prequel hater. Like I didn't like them as much as the original trilogy,
Yeah.
but I think the memes have like made it to where like more people can celebrate liking the the group as a whole,
Yeah.
and especially with episode 3 just because it's so quotable,
Hmm.
it's made the film way more enjoyable as just a single piece of media. Like episode 3 is probably one of my top films now in the all of Star Wars. I would say maybe like number 2 or 3.
It's always been up there for me because
Yeah, it's
you know.
definitely the best of the prequels, but
Right.
yeah.
So yeah. So we go back over water. This and Loverly. Uh, People get
Decent
taken to Camp
Loverly.
4, uh, and we see the Jedi meeting up with the Queen and trying to escape. Now we get this little point in the plot where it's kind of like sort of the end of Act 1, where we get what the mission of the whole film is going to be, which is we gotta get the Queen to the Senate so she complete her case to them that the Trade Federation is actually invading them, not blockading them,
Hmm.
and they need to act. Uh, and that idea of traveling with the queen, or with the princess, you could say. Well, in this case, it's a queen, but it's something that it's like very inherent in the structure of uh, Akira Kurosawa's Hidden Fortress, in which George drew a lot of inspiration for in the original Star Wars in Episode 4, but also since this is the first one of this trilogy, it also has a lot of parallels.
Right.
Um, and in that one, like the samurai, there's like a samurai in it that drives the queen across the land, and they have like stops in where they meet peasants, and this queen kind of gets exposed to how everyday citizens live. And it's something that it's the parallel is drawn a lot when Padme is sitting at dinner with Anakin and his mom, and she's like, I can't believe there's still slavery in the galaxy. Because it's like the queen learning the first hand perspective of how actual people live, which I think emboldens her towards the end to say like, fuck this, I'll
Yeah.
just I'll just go do it myself because nobody here is helping. Um, but yeah, so we also get the R2D2 introduction scene when he repairs the ship,
Hmm.
um, and we have Sidious talking with the Nemodians, with the Trade Federation, telling them, "I want the treaty signed," and he's like, "But they escaped," and he said, "Well, not for a Sith." And then Darth Maul appears behind him. Now, Darth Maul is sick as hell.
He
Uh,
looks pretty cool.
yeah, he looks pretty cool, and right away you're like, "Oh
Who the
shit,
fuck is this guy?
yeah!" And now there are two of them. Uh, but this is the first time in all of the films up to this point, if you're watching it in release order, this is the first time we ever hear the word Sith. Um, we learned that there are such things as Sith, and Darth Maul is one, and he shares a similar name to Darth Vader, like the first name at least. Um, so I guess Darth Vader was a Sith as well. Like I'm just like
Hmm.
putting in the context of somebody watching it in 1999,
Right.
who maybe doesn't know the expanded stuff, because the original movies don't speak about the Sith per
Hmm.
se, in that term. But we get to Tatooine. This is the nexus of all of Star Wars,
Literally,
controlled
the
by the
beginning.
Hutts. And Padme goes with them, pretending she's a handmaiden, even though she's really the queen. And we meet little baby Vader, uh, Anakin.
Are you an angel?
Yeah, exactly. The whole angel thing, it's interesting because I do think there's like a symbolism there. If you think about it, Anakin, like first of all, he loses his mother, and he's trying to go back to her, but she dies. Then he has the wife that fills in that like sort of that void, and then she seems like she's gonna die, and he's desperately trying to save her. But it's kind of like that thing of like bridging the your dark side and your light side, like the your feminine side, and it's a very Carl Jung of bridging the anima and the animus, which is like the female side and the male side, and one of them they have to balance each other, the yin and the yang, in order for you to be like a complete person. And he's craving that onwards because he lost it when he left his mother. So I think like for him, Padme being an angel, it's kind of like this unattainable thing. We learned that Anakin is a slave as well, um, and it's interesting because he had a master when he was little. Literally, he had like he was a slave to somebody, but he also like at the end of his life, he was also a slave to a Sith
Yeah,
Lord.
it's a good way to look at it.
Um,
I never thought about it like that.
yeah, so he like his agency as a person was always being taken from him.
Hmm.
The first thing he decided for himself probably was, well, first of all, he decided to leave his mother because the mother told him like you need to make this decision for yourself, but he was
I think
denying.
killing Palpatine though
No, I was gonna
was
say the first
saving
thing
his
he
son.
decided for himself was marrying Padme, was being like fuck the rules,
Mm,
I'm gonna
yeah,
do it
yeah,
because like these people keep telling me what to do, but I need to like carve some space for
yeah.
myself
That's
to
a
do
good
what I
one.
want to
Hmm.
do. But yeah,
But
I
his whole
like
life essentially was dominated by
by somebody.
the control of
Yeah,
other
exactly,
people's influences.
exactly. Which puts into light
He's
the
had
type of figure
masters
he
his whole
is.
life.
Exactly, he has literally he has.
Yeah.
We then get a moment when we learn that they go on with Anakin. We learn that Anakin built 3PO. Now, how do you feel
Yes.
about this?
All right. So I think they do a good job of like introducing characters we already know
Hmm.
into the established world at
Yeah,
large,
I thought they
and
did a great
bringing
job
them
with R
back
two.
so that we get to, yeah, R2's introduction with
Mm-hmm.
3PO. Um, for me, the weird thing is like the hindsight of, we get to um Empire Strikes Back, and we see all of them in, the Cloud City Carbonite room. And does Anakin remember 3PO? Do we, like, I think to these kind of things just as a viewer, having seen the film so many times.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's a good way for showing individual introductions and like beginnings for the characters, especially as being the first episode in, all of Star Wars, showing how these droids were created, or like where they came from at least. Considering how much influence they have on the story at large.
Yeah,
So to see that he was literally made by Darth Vader himself as a young boy is pretty cool.
yeah. Well, the prequels. So the thing that prequels did when they recontextualized the original movies was that they showed that the movies, all of the movies, were really about Darth Vader slash Anakin.
Yeah.
Like even the original trilogy got
Hmm.
retcon sort of into being the
It's
story
all
of
about Anakin's story.
Anakin. So it makes sense, I think, that one of those characters that appear in every single one of them, which is 3PO, is created by the guy whose story is about.
Yeah.
So his son keeps popping up because I am your father would have been an interesting scene when 3PO was around, because 3PO would have been extremely mortified
Yeah.
that Darth Vader
Yeah.
was, to learn that Darth Vader was his father. Um, so we get that scene that I alluded to earlier where they're having dinner and Padme is surprised at their there's still slavery in the galaxy. Anakin is adept at showing that he knows that Qui-Gon Jinn is a Jedi, and that he had dreams that he was once a Jedi, and that he came back and freed all the slaves. So maybe that's him seeing like an alternate future, like a force sensitive vision. That's something that I have always thought about, because even though that didn't exactly happen, always in motion is the future. Maybe that was one possible.
I believe that line specifically is showing that there are many possibilities for the future, and depending on which way things go, it could be a multitude of those realities that
Hmm.
come true. I think force visions are important, but they don't necessarily mean exactly what is going to happen depending on what things come into motion before then, you know.
Yeah, and if you think about it in like very very broad sense, if you're getting like oppressed by a tyranny, and somebody dethrones and brings down that system, they are in effect freeing a lot of people who were subjects.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I think Vader slash Anakin did free a bunch of people. Maybe slaves is the wrong word, but eventually he came back to being a Jedi and freed everyone, at least for 30 years. uh,
Not on Canto Bite. Those little fucking kids were
yeah,
used to be
well,
influenced
there's
by the
always those
little piggy
douchebags.
guys in
Yeah,
Last Jedi.
exactly. Um, and we get this line where Anakin says to his mom, "Mom, you always
Yeah.
say this. The biggest problem in this universe is nobody helps each other," which I think like hooks into that idea, um, that the mom is the one who's like setting the example for the kid. Without the mom, the kid will turn out different, which is what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we then learn, of course, as they are setting up the pod for the pod race, that he was immaculately he was created by the Force.
Immaculately conceived.
Thank you. He was created by the Force. He had no father. Um,
He's just basically Jesus.
he's space Jesus. That's right.
Yeah. Space
And
Jesus.
I love that moment when Qui-Gon sort of looks into, like, he's like confused. He's like, "Wait, what? Really?" And
There
he's like
was no
trying.
father.
He's trying to remember, like, "Oh shit, I've heard about this. Haven't like this
Mm-hmm.
is this is a thing, like the prophecy."
Yeah.
He's like doing the math in his head. It's like that meme of that woman doing the math. Uh, so yeah, we get the first suggestion of the chosen one, of the prophecy. This is something that there is no suggestion at all whatsoever in the original trilogy. Like,
Mm-hmm.
the most suggestive thing in the original trilogy about the Skywalkers being especially powerful is Luke saying the Force is strong with my family,
Mm-hmm.
and like Obi-Wan telling Luke, the Emperor knew as I did that if Anakin were to have any offspring, that they
Yep.
would be a threat to him. So that's the most we get about the Skywalkers being a particularly special bloodline. And in this one, then we get the idea that, oh, so he's Jesus basically, which frames it in an interesting way. Um, what do you think about the Immaculate Conception? Because I don't know, like at the time, were you like weirded out by the idea that Vader apparently is a chosen one and we had never heard about it?
I think I like the idea that it was, included in the film to
Hmm.
give a sort of backstory to him and showing how he is special and how much of a tragedy his fall to the dark side was, but then
Hmm.
also his redemption to the light, and in showing that, once the prophecy is explained
Hmm.
of him actually being the chosen one, that it does hold great significance for it enriches the original trilogy by giving this sort of explanation.
Hmm.
We
Yeah.
sort of get this fallen from grace character, this hero, who everything is taken away from him because he decided to side with the devil, but then regains his purpose and his identity by rejoining the light and saving those he loves.
Hmm.
I think it enriches the entire trilogy at large.
Hmm. The
The
entire saga.
original, the saga, I would
Hmm.
say at least 1 through 6.
Right.
Um, it it just makes it all come together a lot better, and I like how they sort of like tie in the little like real world religious symbolism
Hmm.
without getting too like in your face about it.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
one thing. That's one thing George Lucas did really well is like introducing real world symbolism
Mhm.
without throwing it into your face.
Yeah, exactly. And he does it time and time again. He makes it broad enough where it doesn't feel like it's specifically making a comment about so and so religion, or this or that, or
Hmm.
like we talk about Vietnam with the original
Exactly.
trilogy, but it's
But
really
but that just
applicable
comes
to.
down to like you like really breaking down the trilogy and like analyzing it
Yeah,
rather than being like, you're just casually watching it and then you're just like, "Oh my god, this is about Vietnam." No. Like
yeah.
you would never, you
It's
would never
applicable
get
to
that.
anything, like any war or any
Hmm.
conflict,
Yeah.
because it's the story of humanity as a whole. Uh, okay, so the Immaculate Conception is one thing, but what about midichlorians?
A
So
lot of people had
yeah,
problems
yeah,
from the very moment it happened to now about metachlorians and what they are to the story of Star Wars. It's like,
hmm,
you think anybody can use the Force and anybody can, wield this power if they believe and if they, follow teachings and like learn how to wield its power. But Metachlorians goes against that. It says like if you have a
it doesn't.
higher than average amount of metachlorians in you,
I
you
don't think it contradicts it though. I think
no,
they
I
go
don't I
hand in
don't think
hand.
it's contradictory either. I think it sort of gives a greater enhancement of our understanding of what how the force is wielded.
Right. So here's my
I've never had a problem with it. I've always thought like it's a good thing to explain that, you know?
yeah. Well, yeah, my take on it. So it's kind of like how some people like are born more talented in certain things because
Yeah.
like my uncle is a musician and I am a musician, but my brother isn't, because like the genes get passed on. And I
Mhm.
think it's kind of like that thing of being born with like innate talent. uh that means you probably like more predisposed to be better at something. But if you don't have training, I mean, clearly Obi-Wan doesn't have as high a midichlorian count as Anakin, but he still beats him in Mustafar.
Mhm.
And it's a line that Luke says in Mandalorian: "Talent without training is nothing."
Yeah.
Comes to that effect.
Meaningless.
It's meaningless. And I think it's the same with midichlorians. I think people put too much stock in the idea that just because you have a high midichlorian count, you'll be a better Jedi.
Yeah.
You have to train and you have to put in the work. And
Mhm.
there's somewhere where talent and training have to meet in the middle,
Yep.
um, for that to happen. And to me, it makes sense because what really the midichlorians are, which he explains, is something in your cells that is serves as the conduit between you and the Force.
Mhm.
So the midichlorians tell you what the Force is saying, um, and they're not the same thing necessarily.
Yes.
And without midichlorians, life could not exist, is something he says, because there would be no knowledge of the Force. There wouldn't be the energy that binds everything together.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like a little scientific, pseudoscientific way
Yes.
of telling how the Force interacts with living beings. Like, what is that thing that they have that makes them interact with? And I think every living being, as every living being has the Force, every living being must then have midichlorians, right?
Mhm.
Like, even like, do plants have midichlorians?
Yeah.
Do they?
All of life.
And I wonder, like, do some plants have higher midichlorians than other plants, and therefore like they could make shit float?
I mean,
These are the
who
questions.
knows? Yeah.
Yeah. And then we jump into the big set piece of this movie, which is well, one of the big set pieces of this movie. Uh the pod race.
The Boonta Eve Classic, to
Yeah.
be specific.
Yeah. Uh and dude, the pod race is, I think, still I don't even know where to start with the pod race. Uh
It was the most advertised piece of episode 1 as far as like, the commercials and the merchandising and the everything with Pizza Hut and all these different places that were advertising the film. The pod race was like the big draw.
yeah. And it's a big callback sort of to George's original interest, which were cars. like
Mm-hmm.
the American Graffiti side of it,
Yep.
where it was like about racing and like going
Mm-hmm.
fast. And I think that's him like indulging and being like, I'm gonna do like a race in the middle of the Star Wars movie,
Yeah.
and it totally works, and it feels like a natural extension of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
Especially in this lawless place as Tatooine, where people are like trading with other people's lives and stuff like that. The idea that there would be a lot of gambling and kind of like for people to make, there are probably sports other than pod race that are happening in Tatooine is the
Right.
impression I get. I think the CGI for the pod race still holds up to
It
me.
still holds up very well.
The only thing I don't like, and I think this is going to be a little bit esoteric, but the George Lucas added more stuff to it with later releases,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it um, and there's a scene later that he also added that I think hinders the pace. I
Do
think
you
that,
want to be specific and mention what those are so people who
well, yeah,
might have seen it multiple times can
a lot of
understand?
those things are like the little introduction to some of the side characters that are in the race.
Mm-hmm.
uh, they get introduced, and then throughout the race, because they were already introduced at the beginning, we cut back to them, like the some of the aliens. And while in isolation, I think they're funny and fun to watch, I think in the grand scheme of the whole movie, it
It
kind of
doesn't
slows it
matter.
down
Yeah.
and makes the pod race a little bit slow. It slows down the film in a way that I don't think it probably should.
Yeah.
It has those like some little gags of like the aliens doing weird shit. The pit droids, I think, is partly because also part of that. Um, but the sound design by Ben Bird is outstanding. I
Yeah.
mean, everything Ben Bird does is outstanding, but in this instance, like a lot, like most of the Padres, and I think this speaks to how great the sound design is. Like John Williams didn't do anything. Like
Yeah.
there was no music. Like
Mm-hmm.
for like probably like
A
I
lot of
could
it, yeah.
like 85% of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's some towards the tail
You
end.
just hear the engines of the pod racers,
Yeah.
and this, each machine has its own unique sound,
Hmm.
and they're very iconic. Like if you hear them, like you could immediately say, like, "Oh, this is a pod racer from Star Wars." If you've
Hmm.
seen the films, you know that.
Yeah, and it also I think parallels greatly the speeder bike chase in Endor in
Yeah.
Return of the Jedi,
Mm-hmm.
um, which I think makes sense. And Anakin does that same move that Leia did, where she came in from above.
Right.
Um, but yeah, overall the pod race is fun, but I think it drags on a little bit too long. But
So
technically
for
speaking, it's
me,
amazing.
I think the worst part of it for me, if you go back and watch the pod race, from a filmmaking perspective, it is way too much of panning from left to right over and over and over between the different parts of the race. It is literally just showing pod racers move from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen across like a canyon wall, or moving throughout the course, and it's just too repetitive with the way that they filmed it. I
Mm.
think they needed a little bit more variation in the shots that were done. It, like, seriously, go back and watch the race itself, and a lot of it is just moving from left to right
Well,
over and over.
moving from left to right makes sense because it's part of the screen direction.
It does. It's in that direction, but it's too repetitive. Like, go back and watch it with that in mind, and I'm telling you, you'll be like, "Oh, like, yeah, maybe they could have, like, changed up this shot or, like, this shot and made it, like, a little bit more fresh." They they just had too much of it. It was a lot of, like, repetitive looking shots.
Okay, okay, I haven't
My
thought of it
favorite
that way.
ones that they did show were, like, the zoom in shots of the characters, like Sebulba specifically, like, toying with the other racers, like
Hmm.
destroying their pod racers
Fucking
in
shit up.
different fashion, and, like, killing them, like, literally just savagely killing some of these racers.
Oh,
Um,
and he's such a good villain too. He's
he's a
that guy
he's a
you love
great
to hate.
villain because he's just like this cocky asshole. He just doesn't give a fuck about anybody else, and they're literally dying in this race, and, like, he's going after Anakin, who's a 9-year-old kid, and trying to kill him.
Voodoo.
He doesn't give a fuck. Voodoo.
Yeah, I love. Yeah, so that moment, it's a great triumphant moment when Anakin finally beats him, and
Shows how
Sebulba.
skilled of a pilot he is.
Sebulba's pod race goes all over the place, and like at the end, you see him like because it's a kids movie, so you gotta show that he survived, and he's like that, and he's like Poodoo. He has a little comedic moment to show that the 9-year-old didn't kill him. Don't worry,
Mm-hmm.
don't worry, kids, because killing is bad.
Even though half of the other racers blew up in some fashion
Yeah,
and
well,
died,
that was
they
done
were
by
murdered
Anakin's doing
violently.
by Sebulba. Yeah, I wonder what happened to Sebulba after. I need the
Yeah,
Sebulba
yeah, I wonder.
spin-off. So yeah, he wins the race. He gets the money for the parts of that the guys need, the crew.
Anakin is freed.
Anakin is free. He's no longer a slave, and we get what I call is like the original sin of Star Wars, which is him being taken from his mother
Mm-hmm.
and being told you're gonna be a Jedi.
Beginning of the downfall.
Beginning of the downfall. And to his credit, Qui-Gon did say to her, like, I'm going to take care of him, don't worry. And Qui-Gon would take care of Anakin as a father would, not as a Jedi master would, because he's very much a rogue element in the Jedi Council. He's not part of the Jedi Council, but that's why, because he doesn't follow the rules all the time. And I think it's a good scene when they say goodbye.
Yeah, it was a great scene. I think
Probably the
Pernilla
best acting.
August did a great job with the goodbye between Anakin and his
Yeah,
mother.
and I think it's probably some of the best acting that Jake Lloyd did in the movie.
Absolutely. Yep.
Um, so we go to Coruscant after we get a little scuffle with Darth Maul. We realize that he's been tracking them.
My
Well,
favorite thing about this is, so there was definitely some scenes cut in this part where
yeah,
Qui-Gon
so
tells
good.
Anakin to duck
Yeah,
after they're just randomly running in the desert, like towards the ship, like they're really in haste to
yeah.
make it to this ship. But the hilarious thing is, in like the final cut, if like you're just watching the film regularly, like Darth Maul literally just tries to run over this random little kid for no fucking reason at all.
What I
He's
wonder
just
is,
he's just a dickhead.
I wonder, is it for him like a random little kid, or can he tell that he's extremely strong with the Force?
I don't think he does.
Why would? Or do you think he's just like, I want to kill a Jedi? Like it
I think
finally.
he's just like going after them, and like he sees that the kid is with them, so he just randomly goes to run him over. Like I
Yeah,
don't think there was any kind of connection there.
maybe. But I love that moment when he jumps out of the speeder bike because it's
Hmm.
so epic, and it's like this is the first time we see like a crazy Sith Lord,
Yeah.
and the fight is way more intense than they were in the original movies.
It is cool how like they saved the dual bladed lightsaber for the final fight, so you only
Yeah,
see him use one blade in this part.
and not only save that, but if you look back to that little sequence when they fight in the desert, like the shots are very unclear onto what's happening.
Hmm.
Like there's a lot of dust and a lot of shooting of the cloaks flowing in the air. Like it's not
Yeah.
very like cinematically shot because he's saving it for the big climax.
Right.
Anakin and Obi-Wan meet for the first time. That's a historic moment. They shake hands.
Why do
Uh,
I believe we're picking up another pathetic life form?
yeah, exactly.
Is
Obi-Wan
what he
is
said
like
to
so
Qui Gon.
anti everything that's going on, which is interesting when you watch the original trilogy. It made it sound like Obi-Wan was the one who was like, well, I found Anakin and I was amazed that he was so strong with the Force. Like
Yeah,
he
yeah,
talked that
yeah. He
like he was
takes
Qui-Gon.
credit.
Yeah, like I think originally the idea that
That was the plan,
yeah,
but it
it was gonna
it
be him,
changed a little bit.
but it changed, and it's more interesting to me that the idea that Obi-Wan actually didn't want to train him at
I
all.
think it makes a lot more sense
Yeah, as to why
because
Anakin
with
fell.
Qui Gon's fall, he loses that father figure that was supposed to be, which seals his fate to becoming Darth Vader because Obi-Wan becomes a brother figure to him,
Yeah,
and he needed a father figure,
yeah.
which
Now
is
he has.
something I'm not stealing credit for, but Dave Filoni breaks this down. If
Yeah.
you go on YouTube, there's this amazing video of it shows why the Phantom Menace is brilliant in its characterization and story of showing why the Duel of Fates is so important.
Hmm.
But we'll get into that a little bit later. I just wanted to say like why uh, Qui Gon really is the key to Anakin's success, and with his downfall, it just goes downhill for him.
Exactly. which all the downfall is of course orchestrated by Sidious,
Mm-hmm.
because he sent his Sith apprentice to kill the Jedi, to get the Queen really. But so yeah, we get to Coruscant. We see like this is unlike anything we've seen in the original movies, like this type of environment um, in Star Wars, where it's like all like
The
a
entire planet
metropolis
is one
city.
big city.
Yeah, and there's always stuff happening in the background. Like even if you see like
Mm-hmm.
every room in Coruscant, there's a window, and there's always shit happening. Like there's
Ships
always
flying in the
shit
background.
flying,
You see the Jedi Temple. You see all this kind of crazy shit.
and it's
It's
great.
very
And
cool looking.
yeah,
It's a very unique planet.
and it kind of really represents the Republic and how at their height they are.
Yeah. I would say one thing that George Lucas did amazingly with all six of the originals
Hmm.
um, is each planet was so unique from the other. You knew exactly which planet it was,
Hmm.
the name of it, like what type of planet it was, depending on the features and all that kind of stuff on it. But Coruscant was perfectly shown as like the height of the Republic by being this giant city.
Yeah, and Coruscant was actually not introduced by him. It was first introduced in Heir of the Empire, the Thrawn
Really?
trilogy. Yeah. Um, that was the first time we ever saw Coruscant and heard it by like read it by name. Uh, as they showed that it was originally the capital of the Empire slash Republic then.
Yeah.
But I think he always had like if you go back to the original concept for Return of the Jedi, originally he thought the fight with the Emperor was gonna take place in the capital, which at that point was called Hadabadan. Uh,
I
but by
hate
the
that name.
yeah, by the time of the maybe I'm not doing it justice, but by the time of the Thrawn trilogy, which came out in the early '90s, which was a trilogy that talk about what happened after the original trilogy, like to the main
Right.
characters.
Yeah.
They settled on a different name. Like the concept was the same, like the big metropolitan thing for the capital, but then they used Coruscant, and I don't think George was the one who chose that name, but I think it's really cool that he acknowledged it when he made his movie. He was like, he would cherry picks elements
Hmm.
from the legends, as it were, for the EU. So we get also a little bit of insight into the political system, how bureaucracy has really stalled the process of democracy, and this is the reason Palpatine was so easily elected. It's because Chancellor Valorum was perceived this weak, and he convinced Palpatine convinced Amidala to vote against him, so a new chancellor would be elected, and then the whole sympathy vote thing, the idea that Palpatine would be like anti-corruption.
Hmm.
It's like picking the strong man to lead us into the future.
This used to be my least favorite part of the film, like growing up as a kid.
Hmm.
But now it's like one of the best things about the original or the prequel trilogy is like all this political stuff is like you really see how much of a mastermind Palpatine was in like his quest for power and like all these little subtle things that he did to get power. It makes the prequels very interesting.
Yeah, and I think visually the Senate is amazing.
Yeah,
uh, for
very cool.
the whole concept of like a gazillion little pots, individual pots that kind of like are stuck into
Because
the
it's,
wall
it's
and then they come
basically
out.
like NATO in real life
Yeah,
with the different countries. It's different planets with different species and
yeah. And fun fact for those who don't know, there's a little there's a little pod with ETs in it, because um, Yoda was in on ET on the movie ET, because Spielberg put him in as like a little nod to George. And so to return the favor, George put in ETs into the Senate scene of Phantom Menace. So I
Mm-hmm.
suggest you go back and YouTube it. You
Yep.
can see ETs in the background of Phantom Menace. Several of them actually. Um,
Yeah, there's
we,
like three of them.
yeah, we get
Whatever
to
that
see
species is.
ETs. I think they do have a name. Like in the ride, I think in Universal they give it a name. I can't remember it though. They show also the Jedi Council, which is something we haven't seen before, We see Yoda for the first time. Now he's CGI. Before he was a puppet. Uh,
Yeah.
like the like
The
2011 onwards
original
was just CGI.
the original Yoda puppet they used for Phantom Menace was horrible.
I have to agree with you completely.
Like it just looked like
A
off
different,
from
a
Yoda,
different,
like
like a different creature of the same
character
species.
in the
Yeah,
same species. Yeah,
exactly.
it didn't look like Yoda. I didn't like it at all. So I was kind of happy when they made the correction to
Me
make
too.
him look like the rest of the prequels
Because
in the CGI.
that was also the weird thing. It was like watching Phantom Menace and then watching the other two prequels, and like for him to be like a horrible puppet in
Completely
the first
different.
one,
Yeah,
and then in the
yeah.
other two he's CGI. You
It
were
didn't
like,
make
oh,
sense. Yeah,
it doesn't gel. Like my brain
yeah.
can't wrap its head
Hmm.
around. Um, and we learned the prophecy. So we this is when they explore the idea of the prophecies of the midichlorians, but we also get the little line when Kiadi Mundi says, the little peanut head. Um, the Sith have been extinct for a millennium, you know. And
Hmm.
Windu very arrogantly says, "I don't think the Sith could return without us knowing," which is kind of like tells the story of the downfall of the Jedi.
I mean, time and time again in this trilogy, we see the arrogance and the disillusion of the Jedi Order, and especially the Council. Um,
Hmm.
they're so disillusioned that they don't even, they can't. They're so confident that they don't recognize everything that happens, which leads to their downfall.
Yeah,
They're hubris.
yeah. And if you think about it as well, the reason they decide not to train Anakin is because they're afraid of him. It's because they're
Hmm.
afraid of his future,
Yeah,
and Jedi shouldn't act out of fear. Like that's the whole lesson of being a Jedi. They're
they're
being
very contradictory to
Yeah,
themselves.
yeah, absolutely. Like they've lost their way, and I think it's very subtle because as a kid you always think the Jedi's are the heroes of the story,
Hmm.
and it's weird when you think about how much of a failure they were.
Hmm.
Something that is of course reflected in the Last Jedi, but we won't get too much into that. For the most part, the Jedi we see in the prequels and in the big chunk of the Star Wars saga are actually failures. There are people who didn't live up to the ideal of being a Jedi. Um, only Qui Gon Jinn is really the
Qui
pivotal
Gon is
Jedi.
the purity
Yeah,
of what it means to be a Jedi.
yeah. Because Obi Wan also tells him like if you follow the rules, you'd be on the console, and he's like, you still have much to learn,
Hmm.
young one. Like there's a I listen to the Force. It's basically his whole deal. Um, and so he doesn't get permission to train him, but they gotta go back to Naboo because the Queen decides she's gonna go back. Because she hears Jar Jar talking to her about how they have a grand army, uh, and that like sparks up a bulb in her head. Um, and it's weird because the Gungans and the Ewoks kind of serve that same function.
Yes, exactly. Of this primitive army against this
Yeah,
technological titan.
this the primitive culture, underestimated culture that
Hmm.
are they that seem like a nuisance and useless at
Yeah.
first, really actually are the ones that come into play to save to deliver on the mission, because they're like
Which still technically doesn't work out just because like they basically were all surrendered and like defeated by the point where Anakin is the one who really saves them by destroying the gun the giant Trade Federation ship which turns all the droids off.
well, I'd argue it did work because, as they say in the plan, like the Gungans are just a distraction,
They're a distraction. Yeah.
and
They
they
filled their
did.
purpose,
Yeah,
but they didn't physically defeat the Trade Federation themselves.
right, that's true. Anakin did, and it
Compared to
makes
like the
sense.
Ewoks who just destroy
Yeah,
the
but they give it a good
stormtroopers in
try
so
though,
many
and that's
ways.
what's
Yeah,
important.
yeah.
So we go back to Naboo. We get this little scene of farewell. And I think in retrospect, it seems like a farewell scene when Obi Wan apologizes to Qui Gon for disagreeing with him,
Mm-hmm.
and he's like, "I'll foresee you'll become a great Jedi Knight." At that moment, you know that Qui Gon is gonna die,
Yep.
because
Exactly.
they're like, "Oh, they're saying goodbye, aren't they?" It's kind of like how Obi Wan and Anakin say
Obi Wan
goodbye.
and Anakin in Episode 3. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
and we get this great. I think it's one of the great climaxes of Star Wars, the duel of the fates. Well, the whole thing they're cutting between four stories. The Gungans battling the army, Anakin up there in the space battling the Trade Federation ship, and Amidala looking for the Viceroy in order to, because apparently if without the Viceroy they will be lost and confused. I don't know what that's about. And the Jedi, which is the best part, fighting Darth Maul and John Williams, dude. Oh, another John Williams blowing session.
I would say that's probably top three John Williams like
The choir.
greatest Star Wars hits of all time.
And it's so cool that little moment when the doors open
Yes.
and you see
Yeah.
Maul
Oh
like
man.
looking up because he knows he's being filmed.
Yeah.
And he just makes like a dramatic reveal. And it's so perfect. We'll handle this.
The-
As a kid, I always skipped to that part. I was like, I want to see the lightsaber fight again.
mhm.
That shit's good. That shit's too good.
It's
And
too good.
it's like leagues above what we saw in the original trilogy.
As
Uh,
far as like the
choreography.
the duel itself, yeah, the
Yeah,
fight choreography.
yeah,
They used Ray Park for Darth Maul, who has training physically to do this kind of stunt
yeah.
work.
He's a stuntman. He was a
And
stuntman.
practiced heavily with Liam Neeson and Ewan McGregor to practice these stunts. And they really upped the bar from the original trilogies, like more slow dueling, and made it this more fast paced, intense
Yeah,
lightsaber fight, which really I think worked out for the trilogy itself, not just this film, but
right.
the trilogy at large. And it really made the sense of urgency with how impactful these fights were and what they
Hmm.
meant to the overall story.
Hmm.
It just rang true, and especially with this fight, because this just Qui-Gon's death, of course, is the implication for everything that came to follow with Anakin's fall to the dark side.
Yeah, I want to make a little asterisk in this fight. One of my favorite. Well, first of all, I like that the intensity is so high, but it's sustained because they keep cutting to other stories.
Hmm.
So I think it's
They
very
stretch it
smart.
out.
Yeah, it's very smart of George to not just stay there because after a while, just like it's too intense, and that happens a lot in films when the action goes on forever.
Hmm.
But the good thing is like cutting between, like figuring out that tempo. But one of my favorite moments in all of the movie is that little scene when the ray shields get in between them. The Maul, Qui Gon, and Obi Wan are all separated by shields, and they all have to wait for the shields to open in order to continue fighting. And I love how like each character is doing, like visually. You can tell the storytelling is so on point because each character is doing what they do and explains who they are so well. Like Maul is pacing like to each side like a panther waiting to attack. He's just like hungry and he just want to kill him. He has a little smirk. Uh, Obi-Wan is super eager in the back. He's just like can't wait to get it on. And Qui-Gon just gets on his knees and just starts meditating. Even though
Hmm.
he's facing a Sith Lord and it's like the first Sith Lord in 1,000 years as far as he's concerned. Like he's unfazed. He's like, I know what I have. Like I'm a Jedi. I know what the whole deal is. I gotta
Hmm.
meditate.
Yep.
And I love that moment of like visual storytelling, how you get in the mindset of each character through
Yeah.
that little scene.
I gotta
Uh,
say though, man,
mhm,
one thing that I didn't bring up
mhm.
earlier on in the film that makes this part just like completely it just angers me is earlier in the film, towards the very beginning, we see Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon use force super speed to
Yeah,
escape the droidicas.
yeah,
And suddenly we never see that power ever again in all of Star Wars. Ever again.
mhm,
And Obi-Wan could have used that very power that they used in the very beginning of this film to help fight Maul and save his master, but instead it just is never brought up again. It's like, I would much rather we've never seen it than it being shown and then never shown again or explained. Like, think of how many times within all of Star Wars that could have been used to like great benefit.
Well, the fact that they use it only once, to me, like indicates a little bit that maybe it's like um
It's like, oh, is it draining their force
it's
energy to where
super,
they're too
yeah,
weak to do anything
maybe
else?
it's like super
I just
draining.
wanted some kind of explanation, you know? It's
But
such a subtle thing in the beginning.
yeah, because they're like in this fight, they're like Obi-Wan just like jumped over like a bunch to get to the platform, and
Yeah.
to me, like I kind of rationalize it that way, even though I agree with you, they don't really like ever circle back to that concept.
Hmm.
uh to me, it's kind of like similar to R2D2 being able to fly, about how he's able to fly in the prequels, but in the originals
Yeah,
he
but
doesn't ever.
R2 didn't really need to fly in the original trilogy
Yeah,
either
he did.
way.
He did.
When? When?
He was on the swamp in Dagobah. He was underwater. That would have been helpful. When he got thrown out of Jabba's sail barge and he was like stuck in the sand, that would have been helpful. There are instances.
It's not as important though. As far as like the implications that Force super speed could have had on the overall story at large,
Yeah.
compared to fucking R2 using his jetpack. Like, come on.
But I think it's similar because the reason he invented the jetpacks, that R2 was having jetpacks, is because the plot required it. And I think it's similar with
I
the
don't
force
I
speed.
don't necessarily think that's true. I think it was more so of him wanting to have new things to introduce to the character of R2.
Well,
I think R2 needed
same
more of
could
a
apply for the
role.
Jedi.
I don't know, man, because
Same
why
thing.
would you show in the very film that they use force super speed to escape enemies that they couldn't use it in the most dire of moments to where they both need to help each other fight a villain
I don't know.
in a place that time sensitive sort of thing is the key to where like they have to get through these red shield walls.
Right. Well, yeah. No, completely. I
I
mean,
I just I just think it was a cop out for them to use that in the beginning. I think they use that to just show that they escape rather than like filming them like, sneaking through a vent or something else. They just use it as a cheap way to get them down the hall.
no, I agree completely. I mean, yeah, as like face value, it doesn't make sense. Like, I could see ways they could rationalize it in canon with
Hmm.
like what I'm telling you about. Like, it's probably like a very draining power that it's like a one-off where you don't use it
Yeah.
too often because, I mean, and he has to fight a Sith Lord, so maybe he wants to reserve his
Yeah.
energies for that.
I just wish it was more explained if they were going to show it at all.
Right.
That's
No,
all.
makes sense. Makes
Yeah.
sense. Um, but yeah, so we kill Darth Maul
We
kills.
kill.
We kill. We kill. Darth Maul kills Qui Gon. Uh, Sad moment, I think. As a kid, that would impact me. Yeah,
No.
that was like the big line of the trailer. Remember, like at the end, the trailer of Phantom Menace was like everything happening at once, like dun da da dun, and so Obi Wan like no. I bet a lot of people were probably like, I guess his master dies because why else would he scream such
I
a.
don't know. I don't think they foresaw everything
You
like
know, a funny story about that also is the soundtrack for Phantom Menace came out like I think like a week before the movie or something like that.
so people saw the titles of
And
the
the title, like
yeah
one of the titles was Qui Gon's
Qui-Gon's
Noble and
death. Yeah.
Qui Gon's Noble, and people were like, "Oh man, come on, what the fuck."
Fucking stupid.
And so that would never happen today. They have that shit
No, 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 no.
so
Yeah.
tightly like locked
Hmm.
down because it would leak on the internet.
Hmm.
But yeah, so Qui Gon makes Obi Wan promise to train the boy because he is the chosen one and he will bring balance. Darth Maul seemingly died. Uh, well, people watch the Clone Wars cartoon know that he didn't. Um, which I think it's cool. I mean, at the beginning, I was like, really? They're gonna bring him back? That's fucking lame. They cut him in two. Well, what are they gonna like? How are they gonna justify it? And you know
Yeah,
the fun thing
I
about that?
hated it at first.
You know what the fun thing about? They never explain it. They never really like sit down like, well, I felt that hole, and then like I crawled for 3 days, and then I did this, and then I got into a ship, and then I did. They never did that. They always they just say like he survived and he's angry.
Hmm.
Um, but
Well,
anyway,
species handle wounds differently. Just like
Yeah, like
The
half
Yoda
get
species
bisected.
age differently, Yeah, his legs were cut off,
He
but
didn't need them.
it's like a lizard losing its tail. It
Damn.
They
I don't know.
survive.
Yeah, I
It's
guess.
that
But
Brack
dude,
just happened
he
to be
lost his
okay.
legs,
He
his
lost his legs
everything,
and he
his
was angry.
yeah, his lower half.
I gotta
Um,
say though, my favorite thing of Maul is like him from Clone Wars.
for
So
sure, because he gets
I'm
character.
he becomes an actual character. He's
Yeah,
not just a plot device.
yeah. In this one, he's just like basically evil, an evil enforcer.
Yeah.
I think he has
He's
like three
silent
guns.
symbolism.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And Obi-Wan is gonna train the boy. We get the idea that the Chancellor Palpatine got elected.
It's a
Uh,
lot of big plot moments that just
yeah,
seal the fate of everybody.
for sure.
Obi-Wan only trains Anakin because of a promise he made
Obligation.
to Qui-Gon. It was an obligation.
Mhm.
So he thought of Anakin as this useless life form. He didn't really care for him. Anakin slowly developed into a brother to him, but Qui-Gon was this saving grace, this father figure for this slave child who he freed, and he was
Yeah,
the symbol of hope and a future. And when that was robbed of him, all of this just suddenly spiraled and eventually leads to the fall of Anakin to becoming Darth Vader.
yeah,
And it just sets up everything.
yeah. I love Qui Gon's funeral and the music in it,
Oh yeah.
and like if you put it in the context of when it came out, it's the first Jedi we've seen dying that doesn't disappear. Like his corpse doesn't disappear
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
show up as a ghost. You know, as a fan, I think people would have probably been like why didn't he disappear?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that gets like suggested or answered later. Um, and we get
Well,
this great
Anakin's
moment.
body didn't disappear either.
Yeah, and maybe it did though. Like I don't like
I don't
when
think it disappeared if the suit was still sitting there perfectly propped up.
that's what I wonder. Like, was there anything on the suit when he got burned? I don't think that, I
I don't
think they
know.
might have not been at that point. And also, who taught Anakin to disappear? That's the to me the bigger
I don't
question.
think anyone did. I think it was just him
Being
being
Jesus, being
so
able to do it.
strong with the Force that
Yeah,
he just, was able to learn, be able to do this.
yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Um, we get this great line, I think, this great moment when Windu is talking to Yoda and talking about how there's no doubt that the mysterious warrior was a Sith, and Yoda talks about the rule of two, that always two there are, no more, no less, a
Hmm.
master and an apprentice. And Windu is like, but which was destroyed, the master or the apprentice? So the Jedi are in the dark, and then we get this great panning shot
The great shot of Palpatine
of
literally
thing like
standing
going to
like right
Palpatine and
next to
Palpatine being
him, and
looking
just
evil.
him like looking at the fire.
Yeah, a fire like
Symbolism.
seeing the Republic about to burn.
The symbolism of that shot plus like the music just seals the deal. It's so
Mm.
epic and foreboding
Yeah.
of what's to come. There was, as much as people like to shit on the prequels and especially episode 1 and episode 2, there's so much there all together that make it so much more enhanced than
Hmm.
what is typically seen as like why it's either a good or a bad movie. There's a lot of underlying things that make it sort of like a low-key masterpiece that people don't give it enough credit for.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm even one of those people who likes to shit on episode 1 and 2, but there's a lot there that people don't give enough credit for.
Hmm. Well, when the movie came out, it wasn't well received
Hmm.
by fans anyway. I think it happened. A lot happened where people were like, "Oh, that was cool," and then slowly they collectively agreed that it wasn't.
Yeah, so we bring up the fandom menace.
Oh God.
So this idea of the denial
Hmm.
of the fandom, and think of there if you go on YouTube, there's the newscasters like interviewing people who were literally waiting outside for weeks
Hmm.
to go see these films. This is especially episode 1.
Yeah.
Weeks.
Yeah.
then they'd interview them after, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, it was amazing," and blah 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 blah, and like they were sort of in denial for what they had just seen because they were so hyped up to see it.
Hmm.
So they didn't really know what to think, and they were just like trying to convince themselves deep down that they wanted to like it so much,
Hmm.
even though they might not have thought it was like as great as they thought it was.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of transferred into the future with the sequel trilogy.
The Force Awakens, I think, had a similar thing.
I think Force Awakens and Last Jedi at first.
Well, the Last Jedi was always divisive, I think, from the beginning. But the Force Awakens was like collectively like, oh my god, it's great. Star Wars is
We'll
back.
talk about that down the road when we get
Hmm.
to the sequels, but I think it set up everything that was to come
Hmm.
with people handling the future of Star Wars.
Hmm. This is in effect the first battle in this intergalactic war. Like the Battle of Naboo is the first battle in what this great conflict that we know as the Skywalker saga.
Hmm.
The war really starts here, even though like the war isn't declared, quote unquote, until the end of Episode 2 with the Clone Wars.
Hmm.
Um, this is like the this first spilling of blood, as it were. Um, I think it's cool. It's a cool movie. I like it more than Episode 2. I like a lot of the dramatic irony behind it. I like the idea that Anakin is a kind, good kid. I don't want to see like the Omen, like creepy version of Anakin. I think a lot of fans were expecting that
Yeah.
he was gonna be like evil from the beginning.
Hmm.
Um, but the idea that he was actually a good person who just like a lot of shitty circumstances made him make bad decisions. I like how it frames Anakin as a tragic figure that rather than just villainy, like evil incarnate.
Yeah. I think there's so many positives about this film that we just don't give it credit for because of the foolery of Jar Jar and the kiddiness and
The most
all
kitty
this
one, I think. This is probably the most child friendly one because
of all the Star Wars.
yeah, because it's like there's not even a war yet. The one of the main characters is 9. And I think Jar Jar is kind of like shooting at that demographic a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, so I think it makes sense to me that it's the lightest one um because it's a moment of peace and like the shit hasn't hit the fan yet quite as much as it does later.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, dude, Phantom Menace. This is my first love
Your
i-
first love.
in the movies.
I would say the one thing that I loved about it growing up was the video games that were spawned from it.
Mm,
Um, my roommate now, who's renting a room in my house, we used to play the original PlayStation One games like Jedi Power Battles,
yes.
and you would co-op as Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon and like
Hmm.
do all these fun different things, and like the video games for it were just awesome. There was Star Wars Pod Racer,
Hmm.
Power Battles. There was these ones where you're specifically like it's like a what is it? Fuck, I can't remember the name of it. But there
There
was
was
one that was like straight up vehicle like versus vehicle battle, like a big demo derby.
right. There was one that was like straight up just episode 1, the video game.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's like a notorious, infamous one because
Hmm.
it's very shitty.
Well, a lot of the games were at this time.
Yeah, like tie-in games that are like made just as like merchandising companion to the movie.
Yeah, they're
They're
just
not gonna be the most
employed to
well put
sell.
together stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I remember I have Anakin's goggles in like a sippy cup or
Hmm.
something, stuff like that. A lot of merch from Phantom Menace. I had the VHS that I watched a lot as a kid.
Yeah.
Because I rented in Blockbuster so much that my mom just like just have the VHS.
I still have that Blockbuster smell like
Hmm.
ingrained in my memory, man. Like
Yeah.
Blockbuster was so great.
Oh yeah, that was those
Oh,
were the days, dude.
those were the days, man.
Just watching Phantom Menace over and over again, and making it. I remember also as a kid, I thought it was weird that it was called episode. To me, it wasn't weird that it was called episode one. To me, it was weird that other movies that were the first of a franchise, like Rocky, for example,
Hmm.
like the first one's called Rocky and the second one is called Rocky Two. The first one is
Yeah.
not called Rocky One, like officially.
Hmm. Yeah.
And to me, it was like Star Wars actually decided that the name of the movie was going to be Episode One. That's because I didn't
Hmm.
know there were the original ones, and the idea that they called it Episode One promised to me that there was going to be more episodes,
Yeah.
which I had no idea there were any more episodes, prequels or otherwise.
Now, since you started with the prequels, did you end up liking the original trilogy more after you saw them after?
Well, I don't know how to because I can't detach myself from that experience. Um, I don't know. Maybe I think it informed me a little bit when I was watching the original trilogy. Mind you, I watched episode one and two, and then the original trilogy. Episode three, I did watch having seen
Okay,
the original
right,
trilogy.
right.
So I did. I remember I was like, oh my god, like there's a whole nother side of Star Wars that I had no idea about. Like I
Hmm.
love Phantom Menace, and I liked Attack of the Clones, and then all of a sudden, like the sequels for it were already kind of out, and I had
Yeah,
to check them out.
right.
It did feel different to me, and as a kid, I was disappointed at the visual effects because that's the big thing. As a kid, you're like, "Oh my god,
Yeah,
it looks
yeah.
amazing." And as a kid, I was like, "The originals aren't as cool because
It's not as flashy.
it's not as flashy. It doesn't look as good as the. I mean, Phantom
Fucking
Menace is
CGI. It
yeah. What you don't like
was
CGI?
all digital. I mean,
Well, that's
the whole thing was digital.
that's why it's like it has a certain feeling to it that I think
Yeah.
it's worthy. Uh, but yeah, so the originals were kind of in a weird spot for me where I wasn't sure whether I liked the new ones or the old ones better. Like in my mind
Okay,
as a kid, I was like, I think the new ones are for me more
that's
so.
fair.
Especially when Revenge of the Sith came out, and I was like, this is the cool one,
Yeah.
the metal one
Hmm.
where he turns evil and
Yeah.
shit happens, and it's
Yeah.
awesome, and there's a lot of
Hmm.
fights.
Yep.
Overall, Phantom Menace, I think it's grown on me over the years, and I think it has for a lot of fans. When I was a teenager, I was like, ooh, but now I'm like, yeah, circled back around. Um,
Yeah.
Great memories with this movie.
Yeah. I used to think it was the worst of all of Star Wars. Um, it's grown on me as far as you know combining all the films and looking at them episodically.
Hmm.
I think there was a lot of good mixed in with the bad moments and the cheesy moments. So I think the good outweighs the bad.
For sure.
And um, there's a lot to take from it that I think sets up so much of the rest of the saga.
Hmm.
It's not just this weird, like wonky one and done film. There's even if there is like questionable stuff or like things you don't like about it, there's still a lot of significance that means a lot to the rest of both the prequel and original trilogies.
Yeah. Also, one thing I want to say before we go out is Watto is amazing, and I think he's one of the great characters in all of Star Wars. And I think he gets the credit he
He
should
is great.
because he's a CG creation, just like Jar Jar, and we people overlook him.
What would be
And
your favorite quote from this movie?
oh God, my favorite quote from this movie would probably uh, there's several. I don't want this stunted slime in my face again. What is it?
My sight again.
In my sight again.
That's a
I
good
like
one.
I like the stunted part of it. Because why would he say it like that?
Mine is like all of the really cheesy Anakin lines, like especially
Yippee!
when he's talking to Sebulba. He's like, "Chesko Sebulba,
Mhm.
Chapuka Umangisa, Matisa
Mm.
Ratiko Puna Pachupa Chawa." Like
Mhm.
super snippy with it,
Yeah.
and it's
Also,
just so
Qui Gon
fucking
has
stupid.
great.
Qui Gon has a lot of great lines. Yeah,
I think the big centerpiece is fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate
Yoda. Yeah,
leads to suffering.
yeah. But that comes
That's
back so many different times.
yeah, but it kind of like encapsulates the whole thing in that movie.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, guys, if you like Phantom Menace or you don't, please let us know what
Let
you
us
think about
know.
it,
Yeah.
because we love having that conversation. And thank you so much for listening to us ramble about such a beloved film. Please join us next time for episode 2, Attack of the Clones, where I assume things will get juicy.
all
Because
that juicy romance dialogue.
oh yeah, good shit.
I don't
Uh,
like sand.
and as always, may the force be with you.
Always.
Dank Farrik.